sooner rather than later.
The major difference between me and my opponent is he wants to maintain more of the status quo, where I want to make the wholesale changes that are necessary. Our public pension system has an unfunded pension liability of $20 billion. Tied to a $15 billion unfunded liability with health retirement benefits. This is my plan. First of all, take the state elected officials out of the public pension system. We're elected. We are promoting careerism and long-time service in the legislature. That is certainly not what our founding fathers intended. And you have legislators that are deciding benefits that benefit themselves. They are feathering their own nest. They are not doing what is necessary to reform the system. I have advocated for it. I have filed bills. I'm not just talking about it. The reforms that my opponent speaks to, capping pensions and extending retirement ages, things like that, they add up to about $2 billion. But the unfunded liability is close to $40 billion. That's just more trimming around the edges. That's why I say take the state elected officials out, which we disagree on as well. He wants to maintain the elected officials in the system. And I believe in order to maintain and keep the promise of the pension to the current workforce and the retirees, we have to change the system for new hires coming in. That's why I have proposed a 401k hybrid system where the state would guarantee a rate of return, but we would get into a 401k system, eliminate the ability to game and double dip and triple dip, and make it a far more transparent and portable system if we move in that direction.
Steve Grossman, did you want to respond?
Two quick points. One, I would not allow taxpayers' money to be used to fund the pensions of state elected officials, period. And I will not be taking a pension should I be fortunate enough to be the next treasurer. In terms of how to invest, Kevin, that was the second part of your question. We had a good September. We had a $2 billion increase in our pension funds. We're back on a positive slope. We increased our pension funds value last year by almost 13%. The best way to do this is to have a diversified portfolio that does a good job. For many, many years, we produced over 9% return. The last 10 years have not been good, under 4%. So we've got a lot of work to do, but the best way to do that is to manage the pension funds wisely, to look at different methods and different tools and techniques to do that, and at the same time to make sure we bid out all those services so we don't spend hundreds of millions of dollars a year on administrative fees, but we cut the costs and put the money right back into the pension funds.
It's disingenuous for my opponent to say that he will not use taxpayer dollars to fund state elected officials' pensions unless you have a whole new approach like I am proposing. Second of all, relative to investments, we are underperforming as compared to other states, yet we hire 130 outside active managers. We pay almost $200 million in fees to these outside investors. We need to do a much better job with that. That's why I'm suggesting that we move more aggressively into passive management, where we can save on fees and still meet the rate of return of 8.25% or close to that, which is what we are required to do. I would also get rid of the bonuses. We pay bonuses to the 25 employees that are more administrative in nature under the pension fund. We don't need to pay bonuses out to attract good people to those positions, and that's another area that we disagree on.
Our next question comes from Enterprise News. Vicki Downing.
Okay, this is to Representative Polito goes first. At the end.
Right.
Yes.
Okay, just keeping track.
Great, thanks.
And not to single you out, but you mentioned that you favor lowering taxes to stimulate the economy, yes. Which sounds super. Lower my taxes and I vote for you, right? But as we know, it's not quite that simple. And you, as a former municipal official, you mentioned that you should know that, and I'm sure you do, that most of the cities and towns right now are starving for revenue, just to hold on to teachers, police, and firefighters. So as treasurer, you supervise the state lottery, which when it began was supposed to be a source of revenue for cities and towns. It's been, I think, rated a few times through the years. It doesn't go exclusively to cities and towns anymore. And with casinos looming possibly on the horizon, there goes that revenue stream. So what happens to the lottery if you become treasurer?
Before you answer, it's important that we say it's the top of the hour. You're listening to 1460 AM, WXBR, Brockton, Boston. Karyn Polito.
Yes, I am a strong advocate for lower taxes in the Commonwealth. And I'll give you an example. The last three budgets I voted against because they included higher taxes and they did not address the systemic cost drivers that are really crowding out the operating budget for our cities and towns. Last year they raised taxes, but they still cut aid to cities and towns 4%. That's the wrong dynamic. We're grabbing the core and we're not eliminating the waste and bureaucracy in government. Back to the lottery. As a former local official, as a fiscal conservative in the state legislature, I have fought hard to protect our lottery. In fact, a few years, you are right, Vicki, the legislative leadership, the Democratic majority on Beacon Hill that my opponent is completely and totally tied to, given that he's contributed over $1 million of his own money to fund and support them on Beacon Hill. They raided the lottery proceeds, and they put those in the general fund and diverted them from the cities and towns. I fought hard to protect that lottery aid. I filed bills, we advocated, and they continued to do that. I will continue to protect the lottery. It is the golden goose, okay? We need to make sure that we protect it. And as I did in the gaming debate, I filed an amendment and said the downstream revenue from expanded gaming should go back to cities and towns so that we continue to keep the promise of our aid to our towns and our cities. I also feel that we need to run it like a business. Unlike my opponent, I'm not looking to increase the advertising budget, which would crowd out more money in our operating dollars for more advertising dollars, and especially you can see what's happening with those advertising dollars in the election cycle. He wants more spending. I feel we should run it like a business and protect the lottery. And I also propose that we should have one lottery commission, one gaming commission, instead of another bureaucracy that was proposed by the Speaker of the House when we do have expanded gaming. We already have the auditing, the legal, and the administrative functions at the Lottery Commission. I served on the Lottery Commission. We don't need another layer of bureaucracy to manage expanded gaming in the Commonwealth. It should be one entity so that we protect the asset of the lottery and protect the mission for which it was created by statute.
Steve Grossman.
The lottery, as we know, is a $4.5 billion business. Generated $903 million of profit last year. The bulk of that goes right back to cities and towns. I, as a person who has been in business for 35 years, creating jobs, meeting payrolls, I have always operated based on a business plan. Any business that I've ever run, any not-for-profit I've run, any organization I've run, I've tried to establish a business plan. So I have a business plan for the lottery. The business plan is to move the profits of the lottery and the money back to cities and towns from $900 million to $1 billion over the next 3 years. I think that's an achievable goal. We won't have casinos in the state at the best fully up and running for probably 2 to 3 years. This is a time when these cities and towns need the money, now, not later. So number one, I would hold harmless the lottery and the revenues going to cities and towns, regardless of what happens. They need to have at least a predictable stream of local aid. That cannot be touched. Number two, I want to make sure that we expand the sale of lottery products. Why on earth don't we sell our lottery products, Keno and scratch tickets or instant tickets, at Logan Airport? 27 million visitors a year go through. If you go to Atlanta, you'll see installations of the sale of lottery products, and they sell tens of millions of dollars at Atlanta Airport. We could do that. Visitor centers. And in terms of the ad budget, I find it ironic in the extreme that my opponent says we should run the lottery as a business, and it's not businesslike to increase advertising expenditures wisely and modestly. I want to ramp up the expenditure of advertising dollars modestly and judiciously and wisely, because every dollar that's spent on advertising produces $2 of net profit, which goes right back to cities and towns. That's businesslike. That's a business plan. That's what I've learned all my life. That's what I've done all my life. And that's the kind of business plan I would try to implement at the lottery.
Karyn, do you wish a 1-minute response, or are you set?
I think that it really comes down to having checks and balances, because you can say all of those things. We can run the Treasury like a business, which is what I plan to do, and to run it efficiently. You need to have the checks and balances within the operation. And if you have someone that is too tied in to those on Beacon Hill and just going to be another rubber stamp, we don't need more of that. We need someone that's going to protect the mission of the lottery, that's going to protect our cities and towns, that's going to stand up and speak to these issues. For instance, this week I stood up strongly against a spending bill because they're adding more spending to a $2 billion deficit going into to next year. Somebody has to stand up for the taxpayers and be that watchdog for our cities and towns, and that's certainly what I'll do as the treasurer.
I've never been a rubber stamp for anybody. And I think my career over 35 years in business, in politics, in the not-for-profit world, leading organizations, I believe the record will show that every organization that I've ever run or been involved in the leadership of was better off when I left than when I got there. I've come in crises and helped solve problems and dealt with crises in business and in other parts of my life. We've got a crisis in this state. It's a crisis that will continue for the next couple of years. Every citizen and every city and town and every person sitting around a kitchen table right now knows that we're in the middle of a crisis. So I will absolutely bring that business expertise and experience, that management experience to this job and be a rubber stamp for no one. No one owns Steve Grossman, Representative. No one owns Steve Grossman.
I have to speak to that because you talk about crisis management. Here you have National Envelope, a partnership business of yours that on this campaign trail you toured. You took a campaign photo, you put it on your website, it was in the front page of the Telegram, yet they are shuttering and closing down today 160 jobs. There was a bankruptcy auction just within this past month. There's a for lease sign out in front of this business a week ago, and these are 160 jobs left. So this is an example of a business that you have touted, that you are part of, that you have managed, and yet these jobs are gone.
All right, so what did I do in the middle of this crisis? When last week we were all blindsided, and by the way, I'm not a partner of theirs. I am a big customer of theirs. I'm one of their largest customers and have been for the past 40 years. So what did I do? I picked up the phone and called Warren Pepicelli, the head of Unite Here, which is the union that represents them. I said, Warren, what can I do? Yesterday I talked to Ron Paquin. Ron Paquin is the president of the local union. And I talked to Dave Duncan, who's worked there for 26 years. I have an appointment with the workers and those who represent the workers on Sunday at 1 p.m. in Worcester to sit with them, to do what my father told me to do many years ago. He said, Steve, you've got one mouth and two ears. Try to use them in that proportion. Be a good listener. I'm going to listen to those workers, and I'm going to do everything I can to help those workers get some jobs. There are creative, innovative ideas out there, and in a crisis, you help workers. This is a crisis in these lives of these men and women. I feel for them. I'm sure the representative feels for them, as she does for the 300-plus workers at UMass Memorial who are also losing their jobs. That's what's going on in this environment. The question is not, does it happen, because we know people lose their jobs. The question is, how do you step in and how do you show empathy and an ability to get things done? That's what I'm going to do coming off the campaign trail at 1 o'clock on Sunday in Worcester to help those people get their lives back.
Well, the paper does reflect that it's a partnership between Grossman Marketing and National Envelope has created a new
Representative,
paradigm.
the paper can say anything the paper wants.
It's
but
your
the
quote.
No.
It's your quote.
Again,
September 30th,
I feel a distinct responsibility for those men and women because we've worked with them for 40 years. That business was opened in 1971 in Worcester. We've been one of their biggest customers over these last 39, 40 years. When they are cut, we in the Grossman family, we bleed. That's the kind of business we've run for 100 years since my grandfather started the business in 1910. So I will do whatever I need to do to step in to try to help these men and women and their families. That's what leaders do, whether they're public officials or private officials. That's the kind of empathetic response that people demand from their elected officials, and that's what this is all
about. We're going
about.
to move on now to our next question from Lisa Crowley, the Brockton Post.